We're live.
All right. Hello and welcome to the PFF Q&A mailbag. We'll probably come up with a better name for it at some point. It's a little bit wordy, but I'm Doug Kyed, joined by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Guys, how are you doing this afternoon?
Well, I'm doing well. This is officially our first Monday doing this. I'm going to do this every single week. I know we did this on Friday, but here we are, our first official one on Monday, and I cannot be more excited for it.
Yeah, doing great. And then the NFL again provided us some great stories on Sunday. So plenty of things to talk about.
Yeah, it's never boring. Drop your questions in the comments, but we do obviously have some topics to talk to off the jump here. First one, the Darius Leonard deal for the Colts. Fred Warner was not the highest paid linebacker in the NFL for long. Darius Leonard signed a 5-year contract extension. That was Sunday that news broke, correct? Sunday morning. Brad, take us through that contract a little bit because it seems like it might be slightly complicated.
Definitely complicated as they always are. $98.5 million over 5 years. So a little bit above, Fred Warner's 95.225. So it does reset the market, almost a $20 million per year linebacker. I think a couple interesting takeaways is that back when Warner's broke, Adam Schefter put out that he'd heard Leonard was trending more towards potentially a 4-year deal instead of 5. Leonard's about a year and a half older than Warner, so I think that would make some sense. Get back to the market a little bit earlier. The Colts ultimately do get that 5th year of control, but a strong deal, for both parties there. Strong cash flows. $20 million signing bonus for Indianapolis is very big. They like to pay as you go and not do that prorated stuff, so he got a lot of good upfront cash flow. And Braden Smith, Darius Leonard, still working on Quentin Nelson. It is an expensive offseason for the Colts, but that 2018 draft class was a really good one.
Yeah, for sure. That 2018 class is really incredible, and we'll see if they'll be able to get Quentin Nelson done. But, Brad could talk about the contracts, but for me, the biggest takeaway for me was, first of all, the Colts finally have some good news over here after the Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson injuries. I mean, it's been brutal the past couple of weeks, and finally some good news here of one of their cornerstones getting locked up for the foreseeable future. But Leonard's story is kind of really cool because he went to a smaller school, South Carolina State, gets drafted in the 2nd round. If you guys remember in that draft, they got a lot of criticism for that pick that they might have reached. And all he's done is really just perform. And it's really motivation for all these younger guys around the NFL who, you feel like you might have a shot and you're getting a lot of criticism. But here he is, Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's been an All-Pro all 3 years in the NFL so far, one of the better picks that Chris Ballard has done. He's been tremendous in the draft, and really, this is exactly the type of player you're looking for when you're drafting. So, he's really been one of the better players, not just on the Colts, but really around the NFL, and he got what he really deserved there with that monster extension with the Colts.
Yeah, really a complete linebacker too, excels in all areas of the field and coverage, pass rushing, run defense. And it tells you a little bit that, the testing numbers for some of these guys aren't everything coming out because he is that complete linebacker and he didn't test actually that well coming out of South Carolina State. So you could somewhat understand at the time, okay, this is a small school guy, didn't test perfectly coming out of school. You could see some of the criticism, but obviously that's worked out really well for the Colts so far. Another massive piece of news over the weekend is that the Dolphins and their all-pro cornerback Xavier Howard were able to come to an agreement to keep Howard on the field. This was kind of foretold by the fact that Xavier Howard was practicing before the deal got done, but definitely very important for the Dolphins to make Xavier Howard happy, get him back on the field, and ensure that he will be a Dolphin in 2021 and beyond. Once again, Brad, do you want to take us through that contract situation a little bit, since that was the crux of the issue here?
100%. A bit unique. The first time, as Mike Garofalo put out, the first time where a team has been willing to adjust the contract with 4 years remaining on it. So in some ways, an important, just the fact that anything happened is a big deal. At the end of the day, also, though, Miami didn't really do a ton. They didn't actually pay more cash or move money forward. They stuck with the traditional cash, but added incentives that Howard can reach. And, maybe not intentionally, but as a result, if he hits some or all those incentives, he would then be the highest paid cornerback on the Dolphins roster for the 2021 season, which is obviously important to him. And then the other takeaway, they made some money fully guaranteed that was just guaranteed for injury in 2022. and also made some other money injury guaranteed that will become fully guaranteed later on. So Howard gets those assurances, feels more confident in his spot on the roster, and that he is part of the long-term future of this club. And gets him back, playing and all these very important things for the Dolphins on the field. So, I think it was a reasonable solution for both parties. To point to an example, though, like, Stephon Gilmore last year in New England got a true $5 million moved up in his deal, actual cash. So, arguably, more given to him there. But I think this was a win-win for both parties here, and everyone's now happy.
Yeah, as Brad mentioned, when a player has 4 years left on his deal, it's really unheard of for the contract to get adjusted. So it's kind of cool to see the Dolphins and Howard's agent, David Cantor, just come together and figure a compromise out of it here. And, the biggest part here for me was really that they also gave him an assurance that they'll renegotiate next year based off his performance and his health to make him up there with the rest of the market among cornerbacks. Of course, Jalen Ramsey right now tops that at $20 million a year. So the way Howard kind of handled this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Darrelle Revis, where he knew the Jets defense with Rex Ryan really couldn't, perform about him there. So he knew they need him there in Miami with Brian Flores' defense. So he stood his ground a little bit there, and they came together to figure something out for now. Again, when you have 4 years left, it's really hard to get something done. So they figured out something for now, and then of course if he performs the way he did last year, with the 10 interceptions, 20 pass breakups, which both led the league, if he just performs at that level once again, they're going to come back to the table next year and figure out something else. So it's pretty cool to see. It's good to see the front office and the agent figure something out, and we'll be back talking about this again next year with Xavier Howard.
Yeah, those cornerbacks to play in that Brian Flores style New England defense are not easy to find. And you guys mentioned Stephon Gilmore. That's another situation that needs to get resolved before the beginning of the season, because the Patriots especially don't really have anyone beyond J.C. Jackson that could be dependable in that cornerback role. So that's something that we'll be paying attention to moving forward. Let's get to one of your questions. Ronnie1311 asked, what's going on with Michael Thomas? That's a very good question. It seems like every report that comes out about Michael Thomas seems a little bit worse. This one is that he had lost contact with the Saints for about 3 months during the offseason when they were looking for updates on his ankle, whether he had, he was foregoing surgery, lost contact with the Saints, came back in June, then they decided to have the surgery. So now we don't really know how long he will be out for New Orleans, but not a great situation there. Ari, answer the question. What is going on with Michael Thomas?
Yeah, the crazy thing about the Michael Thomas injury is that it happened in week 1 in garbage time. Like the Saints already had that game in the bag versus Tampa Bay. He somebody falls on him, the ankle injury happens, he misses time. And there's a belief that when that injury happened and they kind of hurried him to come back late last year because they knew this was basically Drew Brees' last year. This could be his last rodeo. Let's try to win the Super Bowl. And he just was not himself. Like he was really not a factor there. He was not the Michael Thomas of 2019. He was nowhere near that. And then the thing that's really amazing to me is that there's really clearly something that went wrong there, because Sean Payton, when he does his press conferences, he rarely really gives you much. And for him to come out and basically say that the surgery should have happened earlier, and for him to come out and say that, it's really not his thing. So there's really some sort of miscommunication there. And then of course we saw this morning where Michael Thomas kind of fired back with that cryptic tweet saying that they're trying to destroy his reputation. There's something going on over there, and it's spiraling out of control right now. And I'm sure Brad could talk about this contract, but I remember last year there was some talk in league circles that the Saints could eventually look to trade him. So could that possibly happen here? Brad could talk about that contract, but it feels like this situation right now is like in the early stages of a messy divorce. Like there's something going on over there where both sides are firing back at each other and there's no resolution. He's going to miss the start of the season. Who knows how long he'll actually be out? So there's a lot going on over here. There's also the report over the weekend from Jeff Duncan that both sides really haven't communicated that much. He was not answering their phone calls. So there's stuff going on over there that we still don't know about, and it really looks really messy.
Yeah, just to cover a couple angles there. So first, prefacing, I am not a doctor, but I have seen that when we see the word sprain, sometimes we kind of think of that as less significant and less severe. Though sprain is just a minor grade tear, and there's a bunch of evidence to our injury expert Mario Pilato and other people have discussed that high ankle sprains can be like a really significant injury. You know, we're used to ACL tear, Achilles tear, but a high ankle sprain, which is what he had, that lasts for a long time, if not treated properly, and if potentially he was asked to come back early because they did know it was Breeze's last hurrah, could be a lingering injury that affects him. And so I think that's maybe where he's pushing back. As for the contract, this is why we discuss the Saints and we say that cap management is important because of it can prevent things from happening. So Michael Thomas had his contract restructured this offseason. There is over $30 million in prorated money. So they can trade him, but they also kind of can't. They would take on, like I said, over $30 million in dead money, partly this year and a huge chunk next year. If they were to trade him right now, even next offseason, they could, but it still would have, come with penalties. So, I hear what Ari's saying, and I do remember hearing those stories that it was, the relationship was not in a great spot. But from a financial or contractual standpoint, it's not really an easy out.
I think the most difficult thing that the Saints were trying to do this season was build a winning team while also having essentially no depth behind that potential winning roster. And we're seeing it right now with this wide receiver core where they had to sign Chris Hogan. They had to bring back Tommy Lee Lewis. You're talking about potentially Marquez Callaway. Deontay Harris might miss the first couple of weeks of the season. He was, I think, popped for a DUI this offseason. They had to move Ty Montgomery from running back to wide receiver. Traquan Smith certainly in the mix, probably going to be a starter as well. But, I mean, you look at last year where they potentially were going to have Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Traquan Smith, all these guys. Now that depth gets zapped, you take Michael Thomas out of the mix, and this could be a difficult situation for those Saints starting quarterbacks, no matter which one it is, Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston, thrown to Alvin Kamara, tight end Adam Troutman, but not having a lot there at the wide receiver position. Let's get to another one of your questions here. Johnny Camps asked, any possible trade destinations for CJ Henderson? This was a major surprise yesterday that ESPN reported that some league executives feel like CJ Henderson could be available in a trade. This is 1 year after the Jaguars made him a top 10 pick. We were kind of talking about this privately. It's tough to make sense of this situation. Obviously, the Jaguars last year were running that Seattle defense where they're in cover 3. This year, they're probably going to more of a Ravens defense, which forces their cornerbacks to cover a man. But that was supposed to be CJ Henderson's strength coming out of Florida to be in man coverage. So it's possible that they look at him and say, I don't know, this is a tall cornerback. We don't know if he can hold up in man coverage. So let's try to get what we can out of him. Or there might be something else going on behind the scenes. But what are you guys thinking for any possible trade destinations for CJ Henderson?
For me, first of all, before we get into like possible destinations, I mean, like the Jaguars, first of all, don't really get much national attention. So Henderson's story really hasn't been talked about much. But last year, he dealt with like a shoulder injury and a groin issue last year. He only played in 8 games. He showed up to camp this year and he was out again with an injury. Then he went on the COVID list. Now he has a personal issue, which right now they're trying to keep it a little bit more quiet, but there's something else going on there as well. And that really appears to be the bigger problem here. So there's some personal stuff there as well. But, the Jaguars this offseason were pretty aggressive at the cornerback market, which is also worth mentioning, right? They signed Shaquille Griffin. They drafted Tyson Campbell. I know that they really like Sidney Jones, the former second-round pick from Philadelphia. So if they were to trade Henderson, the price would probably be high for a guy who was just picked in the top 10 last year. And this kind of, it kind of reminds me of the Minkah Fitzpatrick situation with the Dolphins where, all of a sudden they trade him after a year, or was it 2 years there in Miami with Brian Flores and then coming in, and they weren't going to trade him unless they were able to get good value for him, and they were able to get a first-round pick from Pittsburgh. So could that happen here? I'm not sure, but we really haven't seen much of Henderson on the field. As I said, he only played 8 games, but of course, we all know how many teams value the secondary and the cornerbacks, and when a cornerback is drafted 9th overall, we know the talent is there. And I remember last year going to the draft, there were some people who believed Henderson could go ahead of Jeffrey Okudah, as crazy as that might have sounded. So a lot of people were high on him. So I'm not really sure if there are any destinations yet. I feel this is like really, really early on in this scenario right now, but it's definitely something to monitor.
Yeah, the Minka Fitzpatrick comparison is really one of the few you can actually use in recent history where his was a season and then halfway through his second season. This obviously, before his second season kicks off with CJ Henderson. The Jaguars have already paid about 64% of his entire 4-year salary in cash. And so an acquiring team would get a top 10 pick on a 3-year deal worth under $7.5 million per year. I mean, that value in its own and the potential surplus value there is astronomical. And so that's why you do expect the compensation would be high. Although, Ari, you touched on some, injury issues and other issues that I wasn't privy to. So maybe that changes compensation a bit, but you would imagine at the very least a second-round pick is involved in this trade. I think if you want to look at destinations, you mentioned how there was talks, and maybe he even goes above Okudah. The drumbeat I remembered last year consistently was the Atlanta Falcons were very interested in moving up to draft CJ Henderson. Dan Quinn, their head coach then, is now the defensive coordinator in Dallas. Dallas does not have a ton of talent at corner. So maybe he's interested there. They could use a surplus value contract as well. They have a tough cap situation, so that could help them a lot. I think maybe Arizona, could be interested as well. Played a lot of cover 2, a lot of man, and that defense also severely lacking for corners. And that could be a piece that maybe puts them over the top, gets them back in the playoffs, and makes them a potential contender in the NFC West.
Another team that runs that old Seattle system is the Raiders. We've seen them have their own issues with the first-round cornerback from last season, Damon Arnett, but John Gruden is never afraid to kind of throw out the script and start all over. Let's get one more question here. Amitch9513 asks, will Deshaun Watson be traded before week 1? I'll kick this one off. I always feel like a trade is less likely than no trade. And this is a situation that has a lot of moving parts. You've got Deshaun Watson, who's got the no trade clause. Obviously, the Texans want to get as much as they possibly can for Deshaun Watson, but other teams are obviously looking at the legal situation saying, if this guy winds up in jail, then who knows when we could actually get him in our system. That being said, he's under contract for quite a while, so he's probably worth what the Texans are asking for. It just depends on if a team is going to be willing to pay that with everything else that's going on there. Ari, what's your read on this Deshaun Watson situation?
Yeah, it's interesting because there was like that report that came out last week that the Eagles and Texans, the talks were heating up. I really didn't buy that as much because I'm a believer here that nothing will happen with Deshaun Watson until the legal situation is solved. That has to be solved first before there's any trade that happens. Now, I could see teams potentially working on a framework of a potential deal, but for a trade to actually happen is hard for me to see because whatever the Texans end up doing, and I know there's some reports out there they want to try to fix this. I have a hard time seeing that happen. But for them to eventually trade him, they're going to try to get the full maximum value for one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, right? So whoever is trading for him, let's just say he gets suspended for 8 games, right? That doesn't even matter in the deal because you're getting Deshaun Watson, not just for this year, but for the next 10, 15 years. You're getting a franchise quarterback for the foreseeable future. So to get that, of course, you're going to be giving up multiple first-round picks plus a couple of players and more. So until the legal situation is solved, I cannot possibly picture them trading him. So that's the way I look at this. I think there's still time for this. I know he's out there on the practice field. He's been doing some, playing some safety and doing all this other weird stuff there, making it a little bit uncomfortable. But that's really what happens when, you cannot really hold out anymore. You got to be there. And he's kind of stuck. And it's kind of awkward, but that's the reality that we're in. And eventually, if this legal situation gets solved, that's a very big if right now because we cannot forget about that. But if it does, then eventually we're going to start talking about Deshaun Watson and all these trade talks are going to heat up again. But for now, we're kind of in a waiting pattern right now. Let's just wait and see what happens here. And then eventually we'll find out and see where this goes.
Yeah, I completely agree. From a legal perspective, we know these things take a long time. And so until that is resolved, look, I think teams would maybe calculate the risk and potentially even cook into a trade right now, say, let's look at this trade. If we assume he might get 8 games on the commissioner's exempt list and still look into, okay, does that drop a first to a second? Like they're probably going through all these calculations, but I would say more so what you're probably seeing when you see reports is trial balloons. It might even apply to the CJ Henderson topic we just discussed, but where basically the Eagles maybe put this out to see how people react to the possibility that Deshaun Watson would become a Philadelphia Eagle, and maybe gauge that and calculate that into their expectations as well. I agree. For now, it's I would say it's at a standstill until we have more information. Maybe this year's trade deadline is an actual more realistic goal.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us here. The PFF Q&A mailbag. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me at Doug Kyed, and we will be back doing this every Monday around lunchtime. We're gonna strive for noon, but we can't always guarantee that we'll be perfectly on time given some of the news that breaks around that time in the NFL.